This program is brought to you in part by the Eugenie and Joseph Jones Family Foundation, a local foundation proud to support education, the arts, and culture in the greater New Orleans area.
Hello, I'm Marcia Kavanaugh. Thanks so much for joining us. Well, New Orleans has a new top cop as the City Council this week confirmed Anne Kirkpatrick as police superintendent. That's as officers were busy investigating two very high-profile crimes, including the horrific deaths of 3 children in a fire allegedly set by their father, and the carjacking of District Attorney Jason Williams and his mother. Meanwhile, Louisiana has a new governor as well as some statewide runoffs to look ahead to in November, but not in Jefferson Parish, where some contentious council races were decided. Here to discuss all that are tonight's informed sources: Jeremy Alford, editor and publisher of La Politics Weekly and The Tracker; Blake Paterson, staff writer, The Times-Picayune, The New Orleans Advocate; Gabriella Killett, staff writer, The Times-Picayune, The New Orleans Advocate; and Josie Abugov, news fellow at veritenews.org. And Errol Aboard is off tonight. Well, we're going to go over to Gabi first because of this just horrible, heartbreaking story of 3 young children killed in a house fire that was allegedly set by their dad. And this also was an incident of domestic violence, which is Domestic Violence Awareness Month, and something that the city's really trying to tackle with. But in terms of this fire and the background on this family, what happened?
So what we know to be true is that 3 children are now deceased after having been in a home where they were being cared for by their father, and neighbors called in the fire as they saw the flames go up, and devastatingly, the children's mother called in the potential threat of the fire because when she was at work, working overnight as a nurse, she got a call from the children's father that he was threatening them in this way, and all of that is according to the affidavit for the man's arrest. He is now in custody, but that was only after trying to flee, jumping off part of the 610. He was actually handcuffed to a wheelchair yesterday when he had his first appearance in criminal district court. He is being held without bond on the murder charges, which have now been upped to first-degree murder charges by yesterday's magistrate commissioner.
No, unfortunately, there had been a history of domestic violence with this family. The woman had protective custody orders out on him. And, you know, as I noted, that this is Domestic Violence Awareness Month, trying to prevent domestic violence. And in this situation, we did see the city health director, Dr. Avegno, come forward and talk about this problem in the city and what we're trying to do about it.
Right. I think everyone is extremely worried and scared that we can have warning signs of violence of this nature and that something like this tragedy can still happen, and it's devastating, obviously, and I think that both the Orleans Parish Communications District and NOPD have recognized that and launched their own internal investigations just to make sure that if anything didn't go the way that it should have in their procedures that night, they're taking another look.
As you noted, the mother of the children had called 911 saying, I have this conversation with the father of the kids. He's placing these threats. Please, somebody go over there, check on these children. She called twice for that, and still the police did not arrive. So that is something that is going to be looked into, is their response time.
Yes, and, you know, there are different classifications of emergency response, and I'm not sure exactly how they were applied in this case, but OPCD and NOPD both will have to go in and make sure that, you know, what she alleged didn't warrant an additional response. So
It's just something that's really beyond imagination. And you just can't, fathom what this family is feeling, what this mother is feeling. And this incident did happen in New Orleans East, an area called Plum Orchard, in a home that had been built through Habitat for Humanity. And there's now, as I understand it, just a memorial kind of growing in front of the house.
Yes.
Of stuffed animals. I mean, just a heartbreaking story. As you noted that NOPD, the fire department, they're going to look into the response times, and that's really like for the first press conference for the new superintendent of New Orleans Police Department, no longer interim, permanent superintendent. That's Anne Kirkpatrick. Josie, we're going to go over to you to talk about that because she was confirmed, and this was this process that was criticized by some. So let's talk about that. You attended the hearing, the council hearing last week, and heard comments from the community regarding Superintendent Kirkpatrick. Then also, she was confirmed yesterday by council. So what was the feedback? What were you seeing?
Yeah, so I attended the hearing last week that then pushed forward the vote that occurred yesterday, confirming Anne Kirkpatrick. She is the first woman to serve as a permanent superintendent of NOPD, and the process that led to her confirmation was riddled, critics say, with a lot of transparency issues. Throughout the selection process following the retirement of the former superintendent. And as you mentioned, the issue of domestic violence was something that came up yesterday right before the vote. In fact, Council Vice President Helena Moreno, she asked Kirkpatrick about how she planned to address domestic violence, and response times was one of the main things that she shared.
Now, she has been interim superintendent for a few weeks now after the mayor had announced a choice. And what happened with this confirmation is sort of history-making. This is the first time this has happened due to a charter change.
Yeah, following the charter change last year, now the council has authority to confirm top executive branch positions, and this was the first one. And even still, they were very critical of how the process actually went, but it was still the first time that they had any authority. And during the hearing in particular, yesterday's confirmation was a much shorter process, but during the hearing last week, dozens, around 20 community members stood up, mostly voicing their opposition to Anne Kirkpatrick and in favor of the previous interim superintendent, Michelle Woodfork.
Michelle Woodfork, yeah. What was the vote, the council vote yesterday for the confirmation?
It was 6-1. Oliver Thomas was the only one to not vote for Anne Kirkpatrick, and he stated that explicitly, very clearly in the previous hearing, and then followed through with that yesterday.
And so Michelle Woodfork, who was the other interim superintendent, there has been, talk about her having a major role now still in the NOPD. Anne Kirkpatrick has said she wants to work closely with her. What do we know? What's going to happen there?
We don't, nothing official has been announced, but both the council and Kirkpatrick, they both shared that they wanted her to have a high role, not have a pay cut, potentially serve as deputy to the new superintendent.
So what's some of the major focus that Kirkpatrick is going to have as superintendent?
During the hearing last week, she announced three main topics: the consent decree and getting the city out of it, which she has experience as the former superintendent in Oakland, California, which was under a decades-long and still ongoing consent decree. Second is dealing with staffing shortages in the department, prioritizing local officers and local recruitment, as well as retaining the officers.
Yeah, retaining the officers. And she calls herself a change agent. So I guess we're going to be looking for some change of some kind in the NOPD. And that's something I was listening to a representative of PANO, the Patrolmen's Association of New Orleans, this morning, noting that there had been exit interviews done when officers were leaving the force, saying various things that were, displeasing them about it. So we'll see what sort of changes come about from Anne Kirkpatrick, now the permanent superintendent of New Orleans Police Department. All righty, Josie, thanks so much. Jeremy, okay, he did it. in one try.
He did it. We did it.
Yeah, you talked about that last week in terms of the governor's race, that perhaps there would not be a runoff. As it turns out, there's not going to be.
It is, and we also talked about that if there were a victory for Jeff Landry in the primary, it'd probably be because of turnout. And turnout was incredibly low. For that top race, the governor that usually draws everybody out, 35% of people voted.
Yeah.
But Jeff Landry obviously walked away with it with 52%, not even giving Sean Wilson or really anybody else in the field a chance. And so the governor-elect now turns his mind to his efforts to the transition process, which is taking place in Lafayette, not the traditional Baton Rouge locale, but we'll have to see how that goes. Moving down the ballot to the next race, we have a runoff on November 18th for Attorney General. This is interesting because this is one of our 2 all-female runoffs here in Louisiana. We don't see that a whole lot, so we're going to see 2 people move on to statewide elected office who are women. Liz Muriel in this she is the right hand of Jeff Landry, the current Solicitor General, and Lindsay Cheek is an attorney from New Orleans. I think Liz Muriel is going to probably be the favorite for the remainder of this runoff in this race. And
then other races too, statewide races.
This is the other race where we're going to see a statewide elected official, a woman, two at the same time. This is Gwen Collins Greenup out of Baton Rouge and Nancy Landry of Lafayette. Nancy Landry is viewed as the favorite in this race. She's a former state representative. She has the same last name as the governor-elect. I think that helped her out a little bit. No relation. Her and all the other Landrys on the ballot. So this will be an interesting race to watch. But again, Republicans are just, they have the edge in these statewide elected races.
All right, state treasurer.
In the state treasurer, we have former Congressman John Fleming. He's the other kind of big pro-Trump name on the ballot aside from Jeff Landry. He worked in the Trump administration, and he's running against Dustin Granger, who's in his second bid for public office. He has a bright future in the Democratic Party if he wants it. He's a financial advisor from Lake Charles, but unfortunately, a lot has to happen for Dustin Granger to try to make up the deficit he has in this race.
Like what? Like for Democrats to actually turn out to vote?
Well, that would be helpful because if you look at who didn't vote, that's where you start. You start on the Democratic side, and I think a lot of chronic voters who are normally at polling places told me that they didn't vote because they didn't think their vote would matter, that Jeff Landry had such a lock on the process, it kept them away. Aside from that, there was no one else on the top of the ballot that attracted these folks to the polls. So, that does not bode well for the Louisiana Democratic Party. We're going into a term of government where the Republican Party has never looked stronger and the Democratic Party has never looked weaker. The Republican Party is probably going to claim every single statewide elected office. They're going to have beyond supermajorities in the Louisiana House and Louisiana Senate, and they're going to have the most conservative membership that we've seen in recent history for the Board of Elementary and Secondary Education. This is all happening at a time when Democratic registrations are dropping in Louisiana. So it's the beginning of a new era, kind of a new chapter at the Capitol.
Let's talk about the turnout for this race. You said that the state officials had just held on to, even after the early voting, which had dropped, that there would be maybe about 45% turnout, which is not great, but it's better than what did it turn out to be, 35%?
It's average for governors four-year state election cycle like this. And look, it's a tough gig, right? You're in the Secretary of State's office. You're supposed to encourage people to go vote.
Yeah.
And so I don't know. I would imagine that it's a needle to be threaded. You kind of try to stick to what the average turnout is, but obviously pollsters kept reminding us that it wasn't going to look like that, and that may be something that election officials can talk about. And we've seen turnout for statewide elected offices lower than this before for special elections. And we've had those big public conversations. That's something that Kyle Erdwin focused a lot on during his time as Secretary of State. But, where does that conversation start? Where does it lead you? How do you get people engaged and voting again? It's a big issue.
And so in Orleans Parish, it was, a 27% turnout, which did not bode well for Sean Wilson. That's really pretty low.
Yeah, a Democrat needs New Orleans, Baton Rouge, and Shreveport to win, and if they're not turning out, it's just not going to happen. The money just wasn't on the streets for that turnout to happen.
So, is this a real surprise that Jeff Landry took it in the primary?
Sure, yeah. Look, this is a major accomplishment from a very talented politician who out-hustled and outsmarted the entire field. And we knew that there was a possibility. Pollsters I spoke to when we recorded this show last week told me there was about 20–25% possibility of it happening. So, but it still surprised me. You know, it's not every day we see something like that.
And we saw Jeff Lanchi jump ahead a year or so ago with the endorsement of the state Republican Party, which really helped with campaign fundraising, right?
Yeah,
I would guess.
Changed the game.
Yeah, changed the game. All right, Jeremy, we'll be talking to you a little bit more later. Blake, over to you. Let's take a look at Jefferson Parish right now, because there were some pretty hot races over there, too, that had some interesting results.
Yeah, I think the big takeaway from last weekend's election was Metairie was the big winner. You had two parish-wide council races, and both candidates call Metairie home. In the Division A contest, you have Jennifer Van Vranken. She eked out a victory against Ricky Template, who is a favorite from Gretna. And in that race, you know, I spoke with Ricky after the election, and he said, you know, I did as well as I needed to do on the East Bank, but really just turnout on the West Bank just was anemic. There was, you know, people didn't come out to vote. So, you know, of the 80,000 or so ballots that were cast, around 62% came from the East Bank and 37% came from the West Bank. So his real base didn't really turn out.
Yeah. The other council at large.
Yeah, the other race is Scott Walker versus Dominic Impastato. This was a blowout. I think, you know, I think a lot of folks expected it to be closer. You know, the Walker campaign throughout the race, you know, were pretty confident getting polling back, showing them 10 points ahead. You know, and so that was surprising. Of course, Dominic Impastato was, you know, not only running against Scott Walker, but he was also facing sort of an onslaught of attacks from Sidney Torres, the trash hauler. So he was sort of facing two fronts of attack here.
But he's a pretty prominent politician from the Kenner area, and he had been a council person before seeking, you know, district councilman before seeking this at large. So that was kind of surprising. Yeah,
it was also surprising if you know, we drilled down on the election day turnout, and in Dominic Impastato's council district, District 4, which is North Kenner and West Metairie, actually on election day, Scott Walker beat him in his own district. So, and when you look at Kenner, which, you know, includes more than what's in his district, Dominic Impastato was only about 100 votes ahead. So really it kind of questioned whether, you know, he has that base that he could have drawn on in this parish-wide race.
Quick look at the other races, district races.
Yes, Byron Lee, Derek Shepard, the incumbent Byron Lee, also won re-election. Derek Shepard, a school board member. And then Rita Bohannon, also a lot of folks expected this to go to a runoff. I think a lot of people are surprised that Al Morella, he's a council gadfly, got as many votes as he did. And then in the District 5 race, Hans Liljeberg, a former appeal court judge, beating out school board member Melinda Bourgeois.
So basically, the takeaway from here, in terms of Jefferson Parish politics, has it sort of reshaped a little bit with the, with the strength shifting?
Yeah, I mean, I think this election really shifted the center of power to unincorporated East Bank. So, of the council members, 5 of the 7 of them now live on the East Bank. Of the parish-wide officials, you have the 2 at-large council members, the parish president, assessor, the coroner, and the sheriff, all living in unincorporated East Bank, Metairie.
Right.
So there was a lot of talk about East Bank, West Bank, but in some ways I think this election was sort of an unincorporated Metairie versus these municipalities in Kenner and Gretna, and I think the real winners there was the unincorporated areas.
Okay, so those races settled, so we'll see how it moves along in Jefferson Parish. All right, Blake, thanks a lot. Okay, Gabby, let's go on back over to you, because something else that happened this week that had everybody going, what? How did this happen? Was the district attorney of the parish of Orleans was carjacked, and his mom was in the car with him.
Yeah, I really felt for him. Janice Rogers is Jason Williams' 78-year-old mother. You could hear and see on surveillance footage that, was going around news media outlets and on social media that he was begging the alleged assailants, please let me get my mama out of the car. Let me, really, really heart-wrenching stuff there. And I did listen to the call that he made to the Orleans Parish Communication District, 911, in order to seek an emergency response. And one of the interesting things is that he had the key fob to his vehicle, and so the person who is accused of stealing his car apparently sat there for a little while trying to figure out how to turn it on. which is definitely an interesting detail. One person at least one person that we know of, an adult male, age 18, has been arrested in the carjacking.
And that person had outstanding warrants.
Yes. So as we know, this individual, Raymond Rashawn, he's 18. He was arrested in connection with the carjacking, and he did have outstanding warrants. He had 3 outstanding warrants in criminal district court for similar crimes, and he had 4 outstanding warrants in juvenile court based on a previous record. He did just turn 18, I believe it was in January, so those would have come in, the very beginning of this year or last year. I'm not sure of the exact details there.
That's a fair number of warrants to be outstanding. What's happened here?
Yeah, the New Orleans Police Department does have a violent offender warrant squad, but they don't deploy that squad on every, alleged assailant, everybody who has warrants out for them. So I'm not totally sure. Maybe it's that they needed more details, that they were continuing to investigate, that this carjacking, and the fact that he was in possession of the car, or he's accused rather of being in possession of the car that was the getaway car in Jason's carjacking. Maybe that helped them eventually arrest him. We don't know.
Yeah. Well, the DA's car was found pretty soon afterwards, and fortunately they were not harmed.
They were not harmed, thankfully. I think just a little shaken up.
Yeah, I'm sure. I saw an interview with the DA saying he kept thinking about, while this was going on, the terribly tragic situation of Linda Fricky last year, a woman who was carjacked but was dragged to her death, and he was so worried about his mom, who was a elderly woman and couldn't move that fast out of the car, and that's why we can hear on the video him saying, "Please let me get my mama out of the car."
Of course.
Really an incredible situation that our top prosecutor, our DA, would get carjacked in this city.
Absolutely. Unfortunately, no one is immune.
Nope, not at all. Okay, thanks a lot, Gabby. Okay. All right, Jeremy, let's wrap it up with you. And so now we have a governor-elect. It'll be a new administration. And how is that going to impact our legislature and, those who are the heads of the legislature, as it were, like Speaker of the House?
Historically, Louisiana governors almost handpick the House and Senate leadership more times than not. And, we're seeing that right now. Now with Jeff Landry on his way to the governor's mansion, that has cleared some paths up, particularly on the Senate side. It looks like Senator Cameron Henry of Jefferson Parish is in line with Jeff Landry's backing to be Senate president. But there's a little more intrigue on the House side, which of course has more members and a little more messier politics. And really the conversations come down to 2 gentlemen from Acadiana. One is Representative Darrell Desitel, who has transferred $1 million of his own money into his campaign and is helping his colleagues out with that cash and trying to put a coalition together. And then there's another representative, Philip DeVilliers of Eunice. The governor-elect, Jeff Landry, has not gotten involved directly in the House race quite yet, aside to ask members to consider a delegation vote, a private delegation vote, to try to get a nominee so the vote on the House floor won't be so publicly messy like it's been over the last couple terms of state government. It looks like Republicans in the House are going to do just that. They're going to get together privately the first week of December and take a nomination vote for Speaker, as well as electing their own leadership. And it's going to be interesting to see what kind of coalition these two guys can put together. They're obviously going to need the Democrats. The Democrats could end up being kind of a swing vote. But on the Republican side, there are so many factions, it's going to be interesting to see. I mean, there's the Freedom Caucus, there's the actual Republican delegation, there's moderate Republicans, liberal, conservative Republicans, there's left-handed Republicans, right-handed Republicans.
That sounds really familiar. It sounds familiar what we might be going through also at the national level.
And that is where the idea for a delegation, private delegation nomination vote came from. It is State Representative Mike Johnson, who is the chair of the Central Louisiana delegation, was watching what was going on in D.C. and said, look, we should probably try to do this behind closed doors and see if we can get one name and have a unified front. So both the House and Senate are on a fast track, more so than usual, to elect their leaders. But they will get together officially on January 8th in an organizational session to elect the next House Speaker and Senate President. One interesting thing on the House side is going back to Darrell Desatel. He is a second termer. He will be a second termer next year. Usually third termer, final term, those are the folks who get those kind of plum leadership jobs. And it hasn't been since the late 70s when the Young Turks, a group of second termers and freshmen came in and kind of seized the speakership and put their own into leadership. Yeah. So we'll have to see if he bucks the trend or history stands.
Well, it looks like there's a good chance that Acadiana might have real powerful positions in Baton Rouge.
They usually do.
Okay. Do. All right. Other stories sticking with you, Jeremy.
Looking forward to the runoff. They'll be on November 18th. There are 20 legislative races, 2 in the Senate, 18 in the House.
All righty. Blake?
Of course, the saltwater wedge, we got good news that it's not expected to impact water in Jefferson Parish, but nonetheless, the parish president, Cynthia Lee Sheng, is planning to deploy their solution to see if it works in case of another saltwater wedge in the future.
Best to be prepared. I mean,
right.
they sort of had it rolled out anyway, so we'll see how it works. All right. Thanks a lot, Blake. Oh, you got me.
At 6, I'll be heading to the vigil for the 3 children who were lost in the fire this week. So I'm looking forward to see who shows up for them and definitely hope that it's a prayerful crowd.
Yeah, just such a heartbreak. Josie, over to you.
Verite has been covering the Baton Rouge Police Department through a months-long investigation, and so you can check that out early next week.
VeriteNews.org, huh? Okay, all right. And let me provide a little reminder for you here, too. And it's something that's coming up on WYES. This Monday night is a new documentary that is produced and written and narrated by Karen Swenson, taking a look at sex trafficking in our state, certainly globally, but it is a real problem in our state. Her documentary is called Turning the Tide, and in this documentary she talks with some survivors of sex trafficking and also talks with our present First Lady, Donna Edwards, who's very involved in combating this issue. Very, very compelling piece. It's a half-hour documentary. It comes on 8 o'clock, Monday, October 23rd, Turning the Tide. Be sure to take a look because it really is a very, very powerful documentary. I want to thank you guys for joining us here and thank you all for watching, and we'll see you again next week for Informed Sources. Have a good evening.
This program is brought to you in part by the Eugenie and Joseph Jones Family Foundation, a local foundation proud to support education, the arts, and culture in the greater New Orleans area.